Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call this meeting to order of the General Government Committee meeting. And may we have a roll call, please?
Certainly. Good evening, everyone.
Hello there.
Councilmember Dennehy.
He's not present in this room.
No, okay. Councilmember Maloney.
Here.
Councilmember Smisher.
Here.
Councilmember Stein.
Here.
Councilmember Tracy.
Here.
Councilmember Worthington.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Hemrick.
Here.
Mayor Troutman.
Here.
Our discussion this night is on a study conducted for us about trails' economic impact. And Ryan, I'll turn it over to you to turn it over to the appropriate people.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Hamrick. We will be introducing Ashley Sack with Fremont Adventure Recreation to introduce the team from CU.
Good evening. Thank you so much for having us tonight. This is a long-awaited presentation. We've been working on this report for a very long time, and actually it started with Rick Harmon and I did a little video many moons ago to propose this idea to the MENV students. This is a competitive process wherein businesses across Colorado and nonprofit organizations bid to have their project accepted by a group of MENV students up at CU Boulder. So we did a little video and we said we think this is an important part of the process of creating a trails and recreation infrastructure in a community, is proving the value and the worth of those trails and that infrastructure. So we were lucky enough to have a group of MENV students, and that's Masters of the Environment. The students selected our project, and from there we hit the ground running, and we are just so grateful to them for their hard work, and we are excited to present this report to you. I run into real quickly before we jump into the report, however, I put on your seats a small trail and recreation guide, and this is related but unrelated. I was supposed to come in last month and talk about our community funding grant that you granted to us last year in 2023, and that was to provide funding to print a trail and recreation guide that was specific to youth in our community. So what you have in front of you is the fruit of those labors, and this is the trail and recreation guide that we distribute to every single sixth grader in Fremont RE1 school district. So this goes out to those students. They have a hard copy in their hand, and we hope that then they take that home to their families and explore the incredible trails that our city and our local land managers have provided for our community. It is very specific to youth. You'll see that there are lots of tips for kids. There are appropriate trails. There's a checklist for trails that they can work on throughout the summertime or springtime and feel a sense of achievement that they've explored their natural environment and their community. So thank you again for that community funding grant. FAR is very appreciative, and we hope that these guidebooks will yield a new generation of outdoor recreation users who are using our public recreation amenities appropriately, safely, and with great enthusiasm. So thank you very much. Okay, so back to the socioeconomic impact report. We at FAR are invested in creating sustainable trail systems. So that to us means two very different things. It can mean that we create trails that are going to be sustainable in the sense that they are going to weather the storms, both metaphorically and physically. So they're sustainable to our trail users. They're going to be usable throughout the years as we continue on to new generations, but it also means that they're financially sustainable. So we are incredibly grateful to the city and other local land managers for helping us to fund trail systems in the last 10 years. As you probably know, we've gone from just a few social trails and cattle trails and things like that over the last 20 years to over 62 miles of purpose-built single-track trails in this community that are accessible to people of a variety of levels, whether you're just hiking or trail running or you're an incredible Black Diamond mountain biker. These trails appeal to a number of people. So as we look to the future, we will of course continue to ask our land managers, our municipal leaders to please help our community to fund these trails into the future. Now, if they're valuable to us, that's great. If we have anecdotal evidence, we turn to our neighbor and we say, is this important to you? Well, yes, I love this trail. It's my favorite thing to do when I'm on my lunch break. But anecdotal evidence alone, we don't feel is a strong enough story to tell when it comes to really putting a line item in the city's budget that says we would like to put significant money towards these trail systems, the signage, the trailheads, et cetera. So what we are providing to you tonight, we hope, is the start of a discussion about how valuable financially these trails are to our community, both as residents and also as we welcome visitors from across the state and the country. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our three incredible Menvie students from CU Boulder. We have with us tonight Joshua Corning, Eric Howard, and Nathan Boyer-Retchlin, and they will be walking you through the report and its findings. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And I'm going to share my screen, make sure it comes across. If everybody can see that, then we should be good to go.
Yes, we do see that.
Awesome. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time with us tonight to share these findings. And thank you to Ashley, as she kind of gave us a great intro there. The purpose of our project was to kind of review what these trails have brought to your community, both economically and to quality of life sort of metrics. As I'm sure you know, within the last 10 or so years, Josh, if we want to go to the next slide, yeah, within the last 10 or so years, there's been a lot of trail development in your community, hiking and mountain biking trails predominantly. This is over 58 miles. This is a lot of Ashley's work as well as the work of FAR in general. That also includes the FAR's 1% for Trails program, where local businesses donate to kind of upkeep on these trails, promote them, promote events, bring visitors into the community, and keep things going for you guys down there. And I apologize. I meant to start by saying if anyone has any questions at any point, please feel free to jump in and offer those. We've kind of summarized a lot of our findings and things throughout the report here. But we do have quite a bit of data and quite a bit of knowledge from the summer we spent working down there in Fremont County. So if you do have a question, please feel free to jump in, and I'm sure we'll have an answer for you. Moving along to, I guess Ashley really kind of summarized our project purpose here. Again, just get some quantifiable data for what these trails have brought into your community. That included trail satisfaction, what we could be doing, what the community could be doing to improve these trails, whether it's difficulty, whether it's facilities, whether it's accessibility for all ranges of community members and visitors. And this was done. We started our project with quite an extensive literature review. This included going over three main reports on similar communities, some in Colorado, some elsewhere. The three main ones were Mesa County, Colorado, Whitefish, Montana, and Helena, Montana. After we kind of got a feel for how to conduct this kind of report, the best methods and practices, we worked through a stakeholder engagement process that included a meeting with you folks here in City Council early in the process to kind of gauge what you would like to find from our report. We also talked to some land managers, city officials, and then a bunch of local business owners as well. We conducted a little survey with them. We had brief meetings where we asked pointed questions to determine exactly the best way that the community could benefit from our project. The final step of this project was joining that city council meeting. You guys gave us some really wonderful tips and just some kind of broad stroke things that we could gather with, in multiple steps throughout this process. The one thing we did learn specifically from city council here was that we need to not just focus on the economic impact of these trails, but also implement a community survey that kind of highlighted what it brings to local community members, what the townspeople think, and what they would desire from these trails moving forward. On the next slide here, Josh, we began by developing and implementing a trailhead intercept survey. The goal of this survey was to capture visiting trail users and understand how much money that they had brought to the community based on because of their visit. This was just a quick 6 to 9 minute survey conducted by the team or the lovely volunteers that Ashley helped us gather from your community. This was either before or after trail users went out on their activity. From this survey, we gathered, we were either us or the volunteers were out on the trail for approximately 56 survey hours. We captured 101 trail users, and 50 of those were non-local. We chose to distribute this survey at 3 of the more popular trail systems as identified by some community members, and Ashley was very helpful in that process as well. That was the Royal Gorge, the South Canyon, and the Oil Well Flats trailheads. This included 6 different trailheads within these systems. And we also used some data from the Trail Forks app to kind of gather what areas were most popular and where we were most likely to capture the most visitors. In that next survey that I just talked about, the community online survey, we distributed that via a QR code around your community. Ashley was helpful in posting that on Facebook groups. We were able to get that in the local newspaper and then posted it as a flyer in some businesses around town as well. This, like I said, focused on some trail satisfaction and quality of life metrics. We captured 260 Canyon City residents with this survey to kind of better understand their perception of the trail systems and what we can do or what the town can do moving forward to continue to grow this system. From here, I believe I'm going to turn it over to Josh to kind of go over a little bit of our results.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So yeah, jumping into more of the results side of things and what we found through these various methods, and kind of want to preface here that there is a lot more in our report and in the raw data than we have time to cover. So just acknowledging that we're taking more of that high-level approach and going over those descriptive statistics from those who were surveyed. Kind of the first question that we wanted to talk about today was about how folks were initially finding out about trail systems and more of that kind of background side of things. So we saw that residents and non-residents alike were really using friends and family and that word of mouth side of things to learn about trails initially, while residents were also using the City of Canyon City resources and FAR resources, while non-residents were either stumbling upon them by chance or utilizing the All Trails app, which is a popular trails and hiking app to identify different options. We then kind of adjusted this question to ask folks where they go to find updated trail information, light conditions, or recordings of those. And here you can see that Fremont Adventure Recreation really has that strong presence with residents, followed by word of mouth and the Trails app Co-Treks, while non-residents still really relied on the All Trails or Trail Forks app to find current information. Shifting focus more now to overall trail use, we gathered this data through Strava Metro. Strava is a fitness tracking app where folks can record their physical activities and it maps them out. We were able to access the back-end facet of this to determine how many trips or activity recordings started at our trail systems and at our specific trailheads. And then here you can see the breakdown of the trailheads where we were surveying, but from that Strava data from 2019 to 2022.
Hey, Josh,
and we can do
what is the upper trailhead?
The upper trailhead is the main trailhead at Oil Well Flats.
Okay,
so
thanks.
when you turn in that main trailhead, yeah. Thank you. And so we can do a few different things with this. The first one is kind of look at seasonality. Kind of a couple points here. The first being that, each trail system has different seasonality based on these recordings. And then kind of the other thing that you can see both in the average and each individual is that the trail system's peak or most common use periods did not align when we were surveying. So we were mainly from that July to September zone, and you can see that we weren't necessarily capturing peak use just due to the time constraints and scope of our project, but definitely something to note going forward. We can also use these Strava numbers to kind of come up with these the total estimates of trail use annually. And while it has been shown that Strava Metro or Strava in general is largely representative of total use in terms of activity breakdown and proportional usage over time, there is some debate as to what absolute or total percentage of use that Strava accounts for. A lot of studies estimate somewhere between 2 and 10%, but those are more focused on kind of larger urban areas. And one of those studies that Eric mentioned in Montana, they found a rate of 17%. We also asked folks about whether they were tracking or not, and found about 19.2% were. So based on those different accounting estimates of how much Strava represents, we have the total use estimates as well that can be used to kind of extrapolate some of these impacts that Nathan will talk about more, because they're only so impactful as the people using the trails. We also got some pretty cool descriptive data about the different types of activities that people were engaging with in Canyon City. 59% of those who were surveyed were participating in walking or hiking, and the vast majority of those folks were doing about 1 to 5 miles per activity. And then about 34% of those surveyed were participating in biking. And while the majority of people were between that 5 to 10 mile range, there was also a lot of people within the 1 to 5 and 10 to 15 mile range as well. And then I'm going to hand it over here to Nathan shortly to get into maybe more of the technical specifics. But we did just ask this one question up front and ask folks to please evaluate their support for the continued development and expansion of human-powered trails in Fremont County. And this was through that community survey that Eric touched on. And of the 260 residents, we saw that over 55% were in that strongly support category, with the vast majority either falling into the strongly support or support buckets for that statement. But yeah, now I'm going to hand it over to Nathan.
All right, thank you, Josh. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the community and economic impacts that we were able to assess through our analysis of our survey results. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this first slide. I'm talking a bit beyond the slide, introducing what economic impact is, some of the challenges and limitations that we faced, and looking specifically at the economic impacts, and then what we were able to deduce from our survey results. So economic impact, which was initially the primary purpose that was brought to us by Ashley and Farr in this project, is trying to look at how much money is brought in to a community because of a resource. Traditionally, in an example similar to trails, that would be how much spending is done in the community by non-residents who visit the area for the primary purpose of using trails. The assumption is that if someone's there on a business trip and they use the trail, they may have spent that money anyways, but the economic impact of the trail is specifically tied to those who are only visiting Canyon City because they wanted to use that trail system. And so generally, the subset of our survey respondents who would apply to an economic impact assessment would be only those that are not living in Canyon City and who identify trails as the primary purpose of their visit. And then the third part of conducting economic impact assessment is knowing the total population size. So in an economic impact, we would look at the average spending by those non-resident primary trail users, and then through some more complex statistics, essentially extrapolate that to an entire population of trail users. So a lot of studies have shown, and if you read our report, we go kind of extensively into the other case studies of communities like Canyon City who've seen significant economic impacts from developing trail systems, and communities throughout the Western United States have demonstrated economic benefits that trails can bring into a community and can help grow their community through increasing tourism. And in our study, one of the limitations that we faced was, one, not having those accurate trail use counts, and then two, just the sample size of data. So we were not able to, and the report goes into this a little bit more in detail, and also suggests next steps for moving on to a more robust economic impact assessment. But it is important to note that in our study, we were not able to calculate that full economic impact figure because, one, we lack the robust trail use data to have a lot of confidence in that trail use number. Like Josh said, we were able to get an estimate from Strava, but all similar studies that were able to do economic impact also have trail counters. So one next step would be a more robust trail use study to get a sense of that total population. And then also repeating our survey to get more of a sample size. We simply didn't get quite the sample size we would need to calculate those figures. However, what we were able to get is really valuable to the community, and we were able to collect baseline data on what trail users are spending in Canyon City, why trail users are visiting Canyon City, the number of trail users from our small sample size that are there for the primary use of using trails. And we can compare that data to some of these other case studies that have a more robust sample sets and look at, how does Canyon City's, how does the economic patterns of trail users visiting Canyon City compare to these other communities that have really clear, strong economic benefits. So in order to do that, what's presented in our report is we present this baseline data that looks at spending profiles of users. One of the questions that we asked on our survey was how much trail users were spending in Canyon City on a variety of different amenities, which we'll get to, not quite yet, Josh, can you go back? But we will get to that on the next slide. We also collect data on the primary purpose of that visitors visited Canyon City. We did a willingness to pay calculation, which is asking trail users how much the trails are worth to them and then multiplying by our estimated total use. And then we also collected some interesting data on residents. We asked residents how much they spend on outdoor recreation equipment annually, and then looked at how much of that they're spending in Canyon City versus how much they're spending outside of the town. I mean, that really gives us a sense on the potential demand for a greater outdoor recreation economy. So I'll talk to some of that in the next slides. So we can move on to the next slide here, Josh.
Real quick, Nate, I believe we do have a hand up from Emily here if we wanted to answer a question real fast.
Yeah,
that would be great. Yeah.
Thank you. I just wondered if you could, Nathan, or any of you, say just a little bit more about what the mechanism is when you refer to a trail counter. Just kind of, how does that work?
Yeah.
What does that look like, and how does it work?
Yes, yeah, thank you for that question. So there's a number of different automated trail counter systems that communities install often at trailheads or particularly strategic parts of the trail, and they essentially register each time someone passes by, and there's different levels of complexity there to increase the accuracy of those counts. So a lot of, and certainly the trail systems in Canyon City, have some complication in terms of people access these trails from a lot of different locations. Probably the most applicable method that we saw in other case studies was one that combined trail counters with the Strava methodology that we used, where they had trail counters at a number of the most popular trailheads, and they were able to use those trail counters to essentially confirm that Strava data, make that more accurate, and then they were able to use the Strava data to extrapolate beyond. But for instance, like a way that a trail counter could be used is like the Oil Well Flats trail system might be one of the easiest because it funnels people through generally one starting point, and that would record how many individuals pass by that trail counter each time. So it's essentially a method, and there is that's kind of a basic overview. There's a lot of other literature and research out there on strategies for setting that up, but that is really, I'd say, like the technical standard for getting accurate trail counts.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course. All right, so on our spending profile, so of the respondents to our survey, we found that roughly 1/3 of the non-residents captured were visiting Canyon City for that primary purpose of using trails. And the table here kind of shows the breakdown of that spending. We found that the average spenders were spending between $70 and $85, and the median spenders were spending between $45 and $50. The difference there is that the averages are skewed a little high by some of those big spending visitors who would visit and spend $400 or $500 per person on a visit. But the most interesting thing we found here is that these values are in line with what other outdoor recreation destination communities similar to Canyon City are finding. So in the 3 primary case studies we looked at from Mesa County in Colorado, Helena in Montana, and Whitefish in Montana, those, especially in Helena and Mesa County, trail visitors to those communities were generally spending between $50 to $80 per person per day. So we see similar investment in the community among trail users here, which to us really just demonstrates that with just continuing to increase the desirability of the trail system and draw more trail users into the community, there's similar potential that can be realized. Can we go on to the next slide?
Nathan, sorry, before you go on,
Yeah.
we have a transcript at the bottom, so we can't actually see the last couple of lines, and I'm wondering.
Oh, yeah.
Under entertainment? Okay.
It's other. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Just another other category, and it's not. It's the average of $10 per person per day in the Intercept survey and an average of $1 on the online survey. Fairly negligible. One of the things with the fairly small sample, you'll see that like the vast majority of these had $0 as the median trail user. And that's largely a function of just the small sample size that we had. So the averages in many of these cases, it's like one person who spent $100 and then it's averaged over 30 people. So
Okay.
it's $10
Got it.
or something like that.
Thank you.
So I think the most impactful numbers for this here are looking at those totals. And then a lot of the other kind of main takeaways are, I would say, fairly to be expected. We see amenities like lodging and gas, and then restaurants kind of rise to the top of those categories.
And I would just mention, that's on page 39 of their report if you're following along.
Oh, thank you for that. So another way that we looked at this is through contingent valuation, which is asking each trail user hypothetically how much they would be willing to spend to use the trails for a day. We did make it clear to trail users that this was simply an economic and assessment technique, and there was no plan to charge for these trails. So based on this is a standard strategy in economics, but has some significant drawbacks, which I'll get into in a little bit. But based on this methodology, our average trail user was willing to pay $3 per trip, and then multiplying that by the total number of trips, we get this valuation of $42,000. However, I will say that in the case of trails, other case studies have shown that this does significantly undervalue trail systems. Mesa County particularly was an interesting case study. And so Mesa County, if you're need to be placed, that's Fruita and Grand Junction. I mean, they're very well established trails destination that draws both from the Front Range of Colorado and from the Salt Lake City metropolitan area, as well as throughout the rest of the state. They did a similar valuation. They did find, with a similar methodology to us, and they found a slightly higher per person willingness to pay number, I think $7 for them. But the most interesting conclusion that came out of their study is that they also calculated using a different methodology, the willingness to pay based on what's called revealed preference. And that is where they essentially look at how much people actually paid to use the trails. That's how much did they pay in gas to get here? How much did they pay in lodging? And they're calculating how much someone actually paid in order to go spend a weekend using their trail systems. And I don't have the figures in front of me, but they found a significantly higher value when they looked at the revealed preference cost. And I think it's just worth mentioning that when you ask someone how much they'd be willing to pay for a resource that in our country is traditionally free, you generally will get an undervaluation of that resource. But I do think this does go to show that there is there is significant value given to these trails per person. If we're looking at like $3, that's like a cup of coffee per day. Similar type of valuation by the average trail user here. So we can go on to the next slide. All right. One of the most interesting conclusions from our report, I think, is in this section on residents' outdoor recreation spending. So this was from the online survey. And the online survey, as we've mentioned, was not a random sample, but we did distribute it to the widest variety of Canyon City residents that we could. We do assume that we probably got a response that somewhat skews towards those who use trails or who support trails. But among our response pool, we did find that 76% of respondents to our online survey recorded purchasing outdoor recreation goods or services in the last year. And the average was $2,256 annually per person, which amounts to a pretty high total pool of spending. However, only just under 12% of that money was spent in Canyon City. We asked a follow-up question, which was, for the outdoor recreation goods and services that you spent outside of Canyon City, where did you spend that? And as might be expected, the majority of respondents indicated spending at least some of that money in online retailers. The next most common destination was Colorado Springs. However, most relevant to you all, I think, is that there was a significant amount of those spending on goods and services that was spent in Salida and Buena Vista. And in our analysis, we really draw attention to that, concluding that that represents a pool of spending in the outdoor recreation economy that really has the potential to come into Canyon City with the growth of that outdoor recreation economy. And this question and line of questioning for us really demonstrates the demand among residents for outdoor recreation amenities in the community. If we can continue on to the next slide. All right. So another big focus in our report was on the impact of trails to residents' quality of life and their decision to move to Canyon City, continue living in the community, and where trails rank on their list of priorities of community amenities. So these were a few of the questions that we asked in this section. We asked respondents to rate the importance of a number of factors in their decision to move to or stay in Canyon City. We asked respondents to rate the importance of a number of amenities to their quality of life. And we also did ask what are their primary reasons for using trails and what are any barriers to trail use faced by residents in the community. Next slide. So for the impact of trails on deciding to move to or stay in Canyon City, we found that outdoor recreation amenities like trail access ranked consistently very high up on the list among the options that we provided. And the options were work, climate, schools, affordable housing, friends and family, a balanced life, an outdoor recreation community, other outdoor recreation opportunities, trail access, or safe community. The most interesting finding that I want to draw your attention to here was the difference between newer residents who moved to Canyon City in the last 5 years and longer-term residents who'd lived in Canyon City for over a decade. While both groups demonstrated value in trails and outdoor recreation amenities, there was, across multiple metrics that we looked at, a clear indication that newer residents are moving to Canyon City because of trails more often than those longer-term residents. And this was one of the most interesting findings because I think it indicates this shift that trails and outdoor recreation opportunities really are a draw to the community, and they're drawing in new residents, and more a higher percentage of those newer residents are choosing the community because of these assets. If we can move on to the next slide. So we also asked about the impact of various outdoor amenities on residents' quality of life. And the options that we proposed are shown here on the x-axis. We've got the Royal Gorge Bridge, river and stream access, the Royal Gorge South Canyon or Well Flats trails, other trails, public land recreation, city parks, community events, downtown amenities, and arts and music. And river and stream access is up there at the top, but most interesting here, this is the percent of respondents who included these in their top 3. So we did ask respondents the same question before to rank their choices, but we also asked them to select their top 3 amenities. And river and stream access was most regularly included among residents' top 3, but the 3 trails that this survey focused on, the Royal Gorge, South Canyon, and Orwell Flats trails, were second. 50% of respondents included those among their top 3 amenities. And I think that demonstrates that among respondents to this survey and those using trails, that these specific trails that we focused on are highly valued. And we can move on to the next. So our report gets into a little bit into the results to the questions about primary reasons for using trails. We're going to focus on in this presentation these barriers to trail use. We asked respondents to submit comments as to reasons that they don't use trails or elements that limit their access to trails. And then we took out common themes from those comments, coded the comments, and then we're able to look at how regularly various themes appeared among the comments. And this table here just shows some of those primary barriers to access. This is just important to draw out because it shows that opportunities for just continuing to make trails more accessible to the local community. So I'm sure many of these aren't surprising to you all, but issues with unhoused population, safety and crime concerns, top the list. Followed by that is access for all abilities and trail design. And then just this concern to have trails that are at different ability levels. So you do appeal to those more expert users, but you also have trails that are maybe wider for disabled folks or diverse ability needs. And then below that, trail maintenance, and then community walkability and bikeability. And this was just those top 5 barriers. And if we can move on to the next. And then, Eric will take back over here, talk to some of our main conclusions and next steps. And I'll just add that if you have any questions, there's a lot more we can expand on. And if you have the opportunity to look through the report, we do spend a lot of time going into discussing the implications of some of these findings.
Thank you, Nate. In conclusion, we were really happy to come and work with Ashley and work with the community. We had a wonderful time getting to know the community, getting to know these trails, and providing this data that's really, really baseline data for you folks down there, as Ashley mentioned, which is really important in future decision making, planning, and improving your community for both those who live there and people who would like to come and visit and bolster the economy down there. So, despite some of our limitations that Josh and Nathan both touched on a little bit as far as time of the year and a little bit of a limited response compared to what we were hoping for, we do feel good about this baseline data already showing what trails have brought to the community, both in the economic sense and in quality of life metrics. I think it's been wonderful. Everyone we talked to was very excited to support the trails. And again, some of that bias comes in, but we do think it's a wonderful thing that has grown in the community so far. A couple of the recommendations that we did talk about in our study included some things such as maybe a longer study that gathers more of a year-wide trail use metrics, like those trail counter details that Nathan talked about. We also feel that a little bit of a broader scope study that captures not only trails, but the other wonderful outdoor recreation opportunities that you guys have down there, what those bring to the community, what those could also continue to add. We were kind of focused on this one aspect, but we certainly are well aware of the rock climbing, the whitewater rafting, the Royal Gorge Bridge and Park, and it's just a beautiful community down there with a lot to offer. And I think that further studies could broaden that scope to continue to kind of build on this new economic input that you guys have been focusing on. I think from there, we have a couple acknowledgments. Ashley was wonderful. We very much appreciate all of her help. She took a lot of time talking with us, as did Rick Harmon. He was instrumental in some of the background specifics of the town and how to conduct a report like this. Certainly a number of members of our CU Boulder community as well. And then on the next slide, all of the wonderful volunteers who spent some hours of their summer out in the hot sun, asking people to fill out a survey for us, which is always a difficult thing, but they were willing and ready to help, and they were happy to work with us, and we were very grateful for everything that they did. And again, thank you to you here at City Council for taking the time twice now to talk with us and let us kind of run through this with you. And we're very happy again to work with your community and help out.
Thank you for that. Any questions, comments from council? Yes, Andrea.
I wonder if, and I'm sure you might have done this, but I didn't see anything about it. You did have a section about where there's space for people to provide recreational equipment, but did you get any data from? We do have a couple of businesses that rent bikes. And I just wondered if you got any data from them. Thanks.
Thank you for that question. We did not reach out to business owners for their data, either on like their spending trends or their or like more of an informational interview basis. I think that could be really valuable and certainly has been done in many communities. We talked about that. At one point we did talk about doing informational interviews with business owners. That just got cut essentially based on the scope of our capacity over the summer and focusing on these interviews. But that is, I think, could provide very valuable anecdotal information about the trends that local business owners have seen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is really exciting to see, and it's really interesting to kind of unpack some of the information that is out there. So thank you for your 57 hours of labor in the sun. The trails are obviously really important to our community, and it's nice to go from just having the anecdotal stories to having a few more numbers and stats to kind of back it up. I was curious specifically about the barriers to trail use, and if you did any crosswalking between the findings that you had with the respondents to our survey and the surveys that you had mentioned from Montana and Mesa County, and if we had similar barriers to access, or if there was anything that was unique or any solutions that they had found in those neighborhoods or communities. Thank you.
That's a really interesting question. Josh or Eric, jump in if there's something I'm missing here. I don't recall that being as much of a focus of those three studies. Not to say that they may not have asked those questions, but those studies didn't have quite as much of a focus on the residents, and they've prioritized the intercept survey methodology. Even for residents, they did a more random sample. There's plenty of surveys out there, some of which are cited in our report. Particularly, there's one from Jackson Hole, one from somewhere near, I think, Taos down in New Mexico, that really did more extensive quality of life community surveys that we based a lot of our methods on. And I would need to go back and look into those, but I'd say that would be the direction that I would point you if you were interested in finding that information, but it's not something we got into in our analysis, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would maybe say just anecdotally from some of my memory of these reports, particularly in Jackson Hole, some of their top barriers or reasons for not using the trails were not exactly similar, a little bit of cleanliness issues there. And then I think some that were kind of usefulness as far as commuting. So not exactly similar to what we found here in our study, but certainly every community is different. And that was just kind of a couple of things that popped into my head there.
I'll jump on that and say that, and we touch on this, I think, in our suggestions for future study. But one interesting future line of inquiry that could give more information on this would be to do some kind of random community sample. So at one point we had a few ideas for this, and we didn't end up having the capacity to include it in our methodology. But it would be something like doing a brief survey at a grocery store or at a gas station or somewhere where you're able to randomly intercept all aspects of members of the community. And I just say this because it is assumed that our community survey respondents, they found this survey primarily either through FAR's Facebook page or through Canyon City's mailings. So we're largely getting respondents who use or support the trails. So these barriers of use are probably reflecting barriers to use for those that at least have some interest in trails primarily. And a more random survey could, because I think one thing that may come up is just lack of information or lack of kind of a culture around trail use, and those types of barriers could come up more in a survey that was able to more accurately represent the non-trail users in the community. Like, why do those people who don't even think about using the trails choose not to use the trails?
Sure. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Could I?
Sure.
Ryan, I noticed the mayor doesn't have a button, so he had no idea I wanted to talk. There's a certain unfairness, I think, but I don't see they agree.
There's
But-
always the shoe method.
I felt that too. Probably this is not the scope of what you did. How have you? Can you clue us in, or can you talk about how other communities promote, or is there a better way? Are there ways we might not be doing to get that information out? I do find in my business, I have many people that have come here that already know, and a lot of are attracted because of our trails. So I know that's important to them, but there are a surprisingly number of people that probably, they know they exist or where they're at. You know what I'm talking, is there a way that you find that may be consistent that they're using? Or someone?
I can speak to that a little bit from kind of my experience in a few communities around Colorado. One of it is just the reality of time. As we talked about, a lot of this development has happened so recently, and just as that travels, word of mouth through, I'm in a few different Facebook groups, and I screenshotted a couple and sent one to Ashley the other day that was, people were like, come to Oil Well Flats, but don't tell your friends, potentially gatekeeping that. But what I really think it comes down to is those community champions and having folks that really believe in these outdoor recreation trail systems and seeing what FAR's been able to do in the past 10 years. And kind of in that one question that we showed that, almost half of residents are using these FAR resources to go out and use the trails. Just once, as that name recognition becomes more, when more of those 1% trails for the signs are, all throughout Main Street, then that just becomes more clear. And then again, getting people to Canyon City, and then they discover the trails locally and then return for those trails specifically as their primary use in the future.
And I'll jump in here, and I don't have as good an answer as Josh did specifically to your question, but in the theme of if you don't know an answer to a question, answer the question that wasn't asked, but you do know the answer to, I want to talk, there's some of our results point to something that I think is relevant and you'll find interesting on this point, which is the fact that the majority of non-resident visitors to Canyon City's trails are Colorado residents. So we did get a high majority of those that are coming, we're drawing from elsewhere in the state. So you're drawing like a lot from Front Range communities, as you probably know, Colorado Springs and Denver. And along with that comes with a lot of day trail users. So when we come back to the economic impact, this was one of the biggest differences that we saw between Canyon City and between the three communities in Helena, Whitefish, and Mesa County that have really more developed as a trails destination. And it was that the average length of stay among trail users in Canyon City was significantly shorter. So the average length of stay among those that we interviewed was, I think, 1.7 days, whereas the average length of stay in these other communities was between 3 and 5 days. And average length of stay was highly correlated to, it was like increasing your average length of stay among your visitors is the biggest way to increase the economic impact that they're bringing into your community. And one of the conclusions we talk about in our report in a little bit was that the Helena study in particular, they looked at these factors for in-state tourists and out-of-state tourists. And there they found that those visiting Helena's trails from that were non-resident Montanans their average length of stay was 1.8 days, which is basically the same as what we found. But the average length of stay among non-residents from out of state was 5 days. So I think when you're thinking about, if you're thinking about this from an economic impact perspective and how do we broaden this impact and how do we get the word out, it's I think another question, so it's not answering the question, but it's giving you another one, is how do you get the word, how does Canyon City become like an out-of-state destination for these things, as well as continuing to draw in-state tourists? Because I think one of the factors there is if someone's coming down from Colorado Springs, they may come use your trails and go home and pack a lunch, and that might be the extent of their engagement with the community. Whereas people who are coming to Canyon City because it's a trails destination from out of state are more likely to have a greater economic impact. So I think that's a worthy question to consider. And one of the ways that, I think we spent a lot of time thinking about ways to get some of this information and weren't able to implement it. And one potential way that you could look to answer that would be to try to do surveys of user groups. So like, could you find different like mountain biking groups from different places and survey their members? What are they looking for in a trails destination? Those types of things. Where do they find their information? I think potentially one place to start, and this will be just my last thought on this, would be going into our survey and looking at or going to report and looking at the questions we asked about where you initially found information about the trails, and finding those most like primary information sources, and potentially using those as a starting point for advertising.
Thank you. Just do you think there's a correlation for staying if there are more trails? Is that a fair question, or do you have a question you want to ask and then you can answer it? But does that even make sense? I mean, we've got 60 some miles. That seems like a 2 or 3 day. To me, it'd be forever. But that would seem longer than 1 day. Or is that appropriate?
No, it's a really valid question, and we did actually try to get to this a little bit. And I do apologize for not directly remembering exactly our conclusion at this point. So the way we tried to answer this question was by asking, how many miles of trail did you use on your one trip, to see, like, we were assuming that maybe more people that were visiting the area were more likely to do longer, have like longer trips on the trails, and that was drawing them into the area. Basically, we didn't get enough responses to draw any conclusions from those correlations. Essentially, the population size of those who were non-residents, who stayed for multiple days, who used trails who used more than 15 miles of trail was so small. There might have been only 4 respondents who fit that category that we weren't really able to draw conclusions. But I do think it's a really interesting question. Josh or Eric, do you have any other insights on that, other than that it's something we thought about but didn't get strong data one way or another?
I can add a little bit. I think I would refer to some things that we kind of talk about in class at CU a lot, where building up your economy and building up the outdoor recreation in a community can be kind of a controversial point with the locals sometimes, based on their trails getting crowded, their businesses becoming swarmed, these kinds of things. So I think I would say that having people stay more than 1 day, I would say you have the infrastructure with a variety of outdoor recreation opportunities. I would say that it's important to make sure that the places to stay, have a wide range of camping or other options for people. I would say that these kind of infrastructure things within the community is a good place to start and make sure that those amenities or those available options for people who might look to come for a longer period of time are there and are supported and built up in a way that the community supports and the community is able to handle, and also that applies to kind of a wide range of folks who may be interested in visiting.
Yeah. And one more thing that just that reminded me of that I'll point you to in our report is that we did find that visitors who were mountain bikers were more likely to say trails were the primary purpose for their study. Whereas I think those that were hiking on the trails were more likely to be there for the Royal Gorge Bridge, and then they had an afternoon, and oh, there's this trail system, we'll go check it out. But we did find a notable correlation that mountain bikers were more likely to visit Canyon City primarily for the trails, and that may be a user group where there's more potential for growth in terms of drawing in new users. Because I think a lot of those hikers are already coming to the community for other reasons, rafting, whatnot. But a lot of the mountain bikers were there primarily to check out those trails. And I think more trails probably is one way to increase the appeal of a location, but another is diversity in trails. Speaking, I'm not a huge mountain biker myself, but we did ask some questions along this as like, what improvements would you like to see? And, I know there's different, like if you go to Fruta, for instance, this is anecdotal to one place, but if you go to the 18 road trails, they feel completely different than if you go to Kokopelli trails, which feel completely different than the lunch loops. One is really flowy, jumpy trails. One is cross-country scenic trails. One is like double black diamond downhill trails. And I think that having some of the suggestions that we pulled out in our conclusions was more accessible and beginner-friendly trails was a priority among trail users. But just having that diversity, how can we have, yes, a big mileage of trails, but also something where if you go to Canyon City, you're like, man, I rode the Royal Gorge trails today, but I need to ride Orwell Flats because it's a completely different experience that I haven't gotten yet.
Yes.
I think we have another hand up here from Emily
I
again.
see that.
Sorry. Apologies.
Yeah, thanks. I just wondered if, along those same lines, if there's an opportunity for the community to do some kind of cross-pollination with events. For example, I think of the Whitewater Festival in July here, and it might be similar kinds of people who would be attracted to that festival who might also want to spend an extra day checking out trails. And so I think it gives us an opportunity to think creatively about those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think that's a huge opportunity. I know at the FAR tent there was probably 250 trail maps given out during the Whitewater Festival, and everybody was way more excited about those than me wanting to hand them a QR code to take a survey. So I definitely think you're spot on there.
Yeah, that's good anecdotal information. Thanks.
So I've got,
and I'll add to
Go ahead.
that and you can look for this if you're able to dive into the report more, but one of the questions that we did ask was, if trails were not your primary purpose, did you increase the length of your stay in order to make use of trails? And there certainly was like a minority of users who checked that box. And then we also asked respondents whether trails impacted their decision to stay, and we lumped all those three together into what we called secondary trail users. So maybe they weren't visiting only for trails, but trails were a factor for their decision. And we found that just under 90% of those who we surveyed qualified as secondary trail users. So I think that does go to show that there's a lot of potential to not only increase the appeal of trails to those who are looking for trails destinations, but to use trails to, compound the value that the other outdoor amenities already bring to the community.
Thank you for that. I actually have a couple of questions and comments for you guys. Did you look or collect any data from the people that use the Riverwalk trail system?
Yes and no. Like primarily, that data would have come from our community survey. And we collected data on the most most popular trails. So in the community survey, we asked residents to select all the trails they've used in the last year from pretty exhaustive list. I think of like 15 different trail systems, including some pretty obscure ones that we found on various maps near the area. And I can't remember if I think Riverwalk was on there. Tunnel Drive definitely was. Riverwalk may not have been on our preset list, but certainly a lot of people put it in as another category. So yes, it's touched on a little bit, and it wasn't a focus of our report, but it does come up a little bit in the findings.
Thank you. I'd also suggest that that one thing that may drive trail use is you kind of touched on it. You mentioned camping, and RV parks. Having good RV parks, I think, is something that might contribute a whole lot to trail use. One of the things that I was really interested in is your slide on barriers to use, and I did not see that in the report. Did I miss it there, or is it there?
It is in the report. Let me go find it, and
It's on page
I will get back
47.
to you. Just
Page 47?
Yeah, the graph itself isn't in there, but there is a table in there that has some really great information.
Okay, so the information is included, but not
Yes,
the graphic.
47 and 48.
Yeah, gotcha. Thank you. Right, I see
Yes.
the table.
It is section 8.4 there. So
Yep, and table 19. And I think from my perspective, there's a couple of really key things out of that particular set of statistics, and that is that some people feel the handicap issues are a barrier to use, and that's something I think that we'll need to make sure that we adequately explore as a council. But then also almost 50% of the respondents either cited homeless issues or safety, which are kind of coupled in my mind. Almost 50% said that is a barrier to use. And so that would be another really productive area, I think, for us to look into, to see if there's some type of problem there that might lend itself to resolution.
And I'll just jump in real quick, and this is a small point, but being the data guy, I do want to make it, which is that those, at least based on that table, those responses weren't mutually exclusive. So I would have to, I don't think we can say based on that table whether 50% said both of those things, that it could be the same 20% who said safety and homeless issues. I think more likely, and that is also the other thing about that table, is that was the percent of the comments, and not everyone left a comment. So that particular table there is, we gave the opportunity for comment, and among those who commented, 20% of the comments touched on homeless issues, 20% of the comments touched on the safety issues. So I just wanted to draw that attention there, but they were certainly significant reoccurring themes.
And that data then would reside in the appendices?
Yes, probably. It would probably reside in the raw data spreadsheets.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you. And just one other thing that I'd like to mention is that sitting here talking and looking at our trail systems, the literature that we have from FAR, that's really great. That's really first rate. And it would seem to me that we've had a discussion about our downtown and wayfinding signs there, that if we had some simplified wayfinding signs showing the trails that we could place, if Centennial Park or, even downtown, some of the literature, you almost have to be looking for it to find it, but just having some way that's random people walking by could see that we have trails would be really interesting.
Are you,
Yes, I just had a question for you, John. I think, and we hear this a lot, that people are afraid that because of the homeless, they don't want to be on trails. And I am on those trails a lot. I'm wondering if there's some way that we could go to the sheriff's department or our own police department, and if there is a danger there, should it not be, have been reported? If it's, maybe they have been reported and we haven't been made aware of the specifics, just so, because if people are afraid, the reason has to be an incident. Did that incident occur? When did it occur? And did we respond to it? And I think that's something that we kind of need to drill into, because you hear people say they're afraid, but when you ask them, well, what happened? Well, they heard about something, or I think that's a PR thing that maybe we need to look at. And, I don't know. I'm not out there 24/7, so maybe things are happening. But if they are, our sheriff's department, there's a sheriff's department in the county, and our police department should have a record of it, I would think, if it's that serious. So, but for us to address it, and to make people feel safer, we need to know what those statistics are.
More data.
More data.
More
We need
data.
more data.
Can
Thank
I
you.
ask just on that point with regard to the data, there's no way to crosswalk those comments with what specific trail system those users are primarily use? Like, we don't have that type of data, do we?
We may. I'm trying to, I think that those comments came from the online survey, and I can't remember if we got primary trail data. I'm sorry, like the raw, it may exist. We did get information. You could potentially go find each comment, look at where it was coded, look at that person's response, and see the trail systems they checked that they used, and potentially there was a primary. I think we did ask all the trail systems you used, and I think we asked their primary trail.
Okay.
So that may be possible to go in and say. It may be tough. My assumption would be that you're going to be looking at so few comments at that point that whether or not it's really, you can extrapolate to being oh, it's definitely this trail system or not. It's almost definitely not yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at that. It may be out there.
Okay. Further comments or questions? I would like to say, being more from an engineering discipline, studies like this, I always kind of approach with a jaundiced eye, but I think the methodology that you used, the way that you talk about your conclusions was very spot on and appropriate and professional. And I'd like to congratulate you on quite a great report, because one of the ways you can tell it's a great report is that it provokes thought. And I think that you can see that from the kind of questions that we had here tonight.
And something I'd like to say, just based on the last question too, is that like we've mentioned, all of our data tables are in the appendices. We did do our best to make them manageable, but I will say that they would probably be a lot to come into point unseen. You have all of our contact information. I know we all mess with the data. I did primarily do a lot of that data analysis. And if there's anything questions that come up later, or questions about about those data sheets, please don't hesitate to reach out. Well, we're definitely a resource here and want it to be used if there's a use for it.
Thanks for that. Anything else? Do we have anything else? Then we are adjourned. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you so much,
Thanks.
folks.
Great.
Yeah, thanks for having us again.